Okay, let's start with the hardware. The first thing you'll need is a scale. If you're in the US, you're probably not used to using a scale for baking. So I want to pause just for a second and talk about measuring baking ingredients. It is absolutely critical, especially for flour, that you weigh your flour. You can pick up a scale like this for like 20 bucks at Target. And let me show you why you need to weigh your flour. So 1 US cup of flour should weigh 120 grams if properly measured. And properly measured would generally be like you whisk it up and make it light and fluffy in the bag, and then you use a spoon and you individually, not, don't compact it, but carefully, 1 spoonful at a time, scoop it in the cup and level it. But that's not how people do it. That's a huge effort. What people generally do is they take the cup and they scoop it. Let me turn on the scale here. And they scoop the flour out of the bag, and then they use a knife to level off the top of it. And that's generally how people, oops, almost didn't get the cup full. And that's generally how people measure, measure the flour. So let me just show you what happens when you do it that way. Now this wasn't even full because it was hard to do because the bag isn't full. But instead of 120 grams, I got 138 grams. Had I actually filled the cup all the way up, it probably would have been about 150 grams. So the difference between 120 grams and 150 grams is like a 20-25% increase in the amount of flour. That's going to cause your cake, your cinnamon roll, whatever you're making to be really dense and dry, and it's not the correct amount of flour. So get a scale, pay the 20 bucks, take the guesswork completely out of it. Another thing that you're going to need is a thermometer. I like this one because it's a remote. The probe goes inside whatever it is you're measuring, but then this unit sits on the outside of the oven. It's magnetic, so it can stick right to the oven front door. Um, Cinnamon rolls and breads are done at 190 degrees Fahrenheit or 88 degrees Celsius. So you actually want to pull them out before that. So I would pull out my cinnamon rolls when they're about 185 degrees Fahrenheit or 85 degrees Celsius. And if you're baking them in a glass dish, which is the best way to make cinnamon rolls in particular, they'll continue to cook and end up at the correct temperature when they're done, sitting on the counter. So that is the way to get the absolute perfect texture and density and everything. This unit has an alarm on it, so you can set the alarm to go off at that temperature. Another thing that you'll need is unflavored dental floss. Um, this is for cutting the cinnamon rolls. This is how you get perfectly round cinnamon rolls and they don't get squished flat. And I'll show you how to use that when we get to the cutting step. Now, the reason for converting all of the recipe, the dry ingredients to grams and the wet ingredients, I convert those to milliliters, is because it makes it very easy to scale a recipe if I want to bake it in different pans. For example, this is a 9-inch by 13-inch dish, which means it's 117 square inches of area. If I wanted to take a recipe that normally fit perfectly in this pan and say make it into a 3-tiered cake, which was a 10-inch cake, an 8-inch cake, and a 6-inch cake stacked up on top of each other, I would go to an online calculator and calculate the area for each of those pans. So the 10-inch circle is 78.5 square inches, the 8-inch is 50.25 square inches, and the 6-inch circle is 28.25 square inches in area. So add those three numbers up, and that comes out to be 157 square inches of area. Since the original recipe was for 117 square inches, I'd take that 117, divide it by 157, and I would see that I needed 75% more ingredients. So then I would just simply increase the weight of all the grams by 75% and amount of liquid ingredients in milliliters by 75%. It would be very, very difficult to do that if I was trying to do it in imperial measurements with ounces and pounds and teaspoons and tablespoons. So that's why I convert everything to grams and milliliters, and that's why all professional bakeries do that. This is something that I saw years ago, and we used them in the bakery, and I absolutely loved it. Totally not necessary, but this is a dough stirrer. So for something like a thick dough like bread, this is a way to stir the ingredients together to get them ready. The first stir, because the dough hook doesn't work that well, and other things are just hard to stir it with. Totally optional. I think I got this one on kingarthurflour.com, and I actually really love it. It is not dishwasher safe, but it is incredibly handy. Let's talk about the ingredients that go into a really good cinnamon roll. Now, I like this ratio because this produces the exact perfect chewy, moist cinnamon roll that I love. Everybody has things, that they prefer, but this one's light and fluffy, but still chewy and has like a tooth to it. And I just love these ratios. So I'm using, of course, regular sugar. I sometimes use King Arthur all-purpose flour, sometimes use white lily flour. White lily flour is a little bit lower in protein, so it produces a lighter baked good. Do not use self-rising flour though. You do want to use regular all-purpose flour. King Arthur flour has a little bit higher protein, and so it produces usually a little bit chewier of a roll. The important thing for me, for these, the reason I always choose one of these two brands is because they actually monitor and measure their protein content to make sure it's consistent. So you don't have to guess between batches how something is going to turn out. Other mass-produced flours like Gold Medal and whatnot really don't monitor it that carefully, so that can impact your quality of baked goods. The other thing you need, of course, is active dry yeast. What I always do is, although I've never had yeast go bad, the rule of thumb is once you open the yeast, 6 months from the date you opened it, you want to throw it out. It loses its effectiveness. It might not be completely dead. So I normally, when I open them, I just use a Sharpie to say, okay, today plus 6 months, and I write that on the lid as the expiration date, so I don't have to try and remember when I opened it later. Regular table salt, an egg. This is actually 1.5 cups of buttermilk, but I shook it up so it's a little bit full of air. This recipe works great with regular milk as well. This is not used for leavening. The reason I put buttermilk in it though is the extra acid helps to break down a little bit of the gluten while it's cooking, and while it still keeps that chew, it makes it a little bit more tender. You could also put like 1.5 tablespoons of white vinegar in the bottom and then fill it up to the 1.5 mark with milk. That works great as well. I just always have buttermilk in the refrigerator because I bake a lot. And the last ingredient is 3 to 4 tablespoons of butter, which is a half a stick, about 56 grams. I err a little bit on the heavier side with that because of course I love butter, and this has been sitting out for at least an hour at room temperature. And actually, when I first pulled it out, I went ahead and used it to just very lightly break the tension on the bottom of the pan and oil it just a little bit. You could also use spray to do that. That works great too. All right, so the other reason using a scale is amazing is you don't have a whole bunch of extra dirty dishes. There's not so many involved in cinnamon rolls, but just in general, because you can put everything in the one mixing bowl straight in there. So what you want to do is put your mixing bowl on and then hit the power button or tare button to make sure it's at 0. I have it set to grams, so you can hit the unit if it's not at grams to do that. And I'm going to try and do this while filming with one hand because it really is just that easy. So I'm going to add my 562 grams of flour. Close enough. And then I'm going to add 100 grams of sugar. So I'm going to hit the tare button to reset that to 0. And I'm going to add about 100 grams of sugar. The sugar amount doesn't have to be exact. Definitely don't go more than 100 grams. I might have a little less in this recipe because I'm getting kind of the bottom of my sugar bag. That's not a big deal. Oh, look, right at 100. Perfect. All right, now the yeast is gonna be a little harder because I'm gonna need to use a spoon to get that out. By the way, some people ask, does it matter if I use bread yeast or double rising or fast rising? It really honestly doesn't make a huge difference. I wouldn't get too tangled up in that. The difference between them isn't that significant. Oops, let me tear the scale here. All right, back. All right, so for the yeast, this is, active dry yeast, just regular active dry yeast. If you're using fresh yeast, you're gonna wanna double the amount. If you're using bread yeast or fast rising, really it doesn't make a huge difference. It's just, they add a little bit of sugar in the fast rising, but it really doesn't matter. Just, whatever yeast. So for the yeast, I'm gonna use 7 grams of active dry yeast. I'm gonna try and do this with one hand. I am right-handed, so I'm playing with fire, trying to use my left hand to do anything here. Ooh, there we go, 7 grams. All right. The next thing I'm gonna add is 1 egg. And what I'm gonna do is just make a little well in the center here to drop in my egg. And I'm just gonna stir that up just slightly to break it up a little bit with this spoon. I'm not trying to necessarily mix it in. I'm just, trying to mix the yolk and the white together just a little bit. All right, that is good enough. Clean off my spoon there. And then that brings me to my 1.5 cups of buttermilk. So I'm gonna just pour that right in. And then for the salt, I'm gonna need 9 grams of salt. Oops. Perfect. There's one ingredient that I'm going to add that you've probably never seen in any other recipe, and this is a secret for baking. If you want something to come out extra chewy, you're going to add just a splash of unsulfured molasses. And I mean just a splash, like 2 teaspoons max. That's it. That's it. All right, so we're good. And that's actually a really good trick for if you're making pizza crust as well. It makes the pizza crust really nice and chewy, and it kind of gives it a deeper flavor. Some people ask, can you just use brown sugar instead of granulated sugar? No, you absolutely can't, because you have no idea what the ratio of sugar to molasses is in that. You definitely don't want to interchange those two in baking as a general rule. It's follow the recipe when it comes to that. All right, so I'm still trying to do this one-handed. I might not be able to get through it, but so I'm gonna just take and stir all of these ingredients together as best I can here. I think I'm gonna have to put the phone down to do this because this is gonna take both hands. All right, so it is stirred up, and see it's, not quite together. That's okay. It's gonna look really shaggy. If you were to hold it and pinch it, you see it is dough-like and it can stick together. What's missing is I haven't added the softened butter yet, but I want to wait for this to come together and for all of the liquid to be absorbed by the flour before proceeding to the actual kneading step. That's called an autolyse, is the 15-20 minutes, depending on the dough, of when you're letting the flour hydrate completely. That gives you a lot better gluten development. But I want to do that before I mix in the butter. So I will go ahead and let this sit here. I'm just going to cover it with this towel. All right, so I let it sit for about 20 minutes, covered with a towel to make sure it didn't lose any moisture. And now I'm gonna mix it with the dough hook on speed 2 for a total of exactly 7 minutes. Never more than 7 minutes. That is the magic number in the KitchenAid. More than that, your cinnamon rolls will be too chewy, like tough. And then what I'm actually going to do is the last 2 minutes, I'll start adding the butter in about a tablespoon at a time. And this is softened butter. It's really important that it's not melted because the melted butter will ooze out all over your pan. You want it to be softened so that it like bakes into the actual dough as it cooks. So you can see that after 5 minutes of kneading, it's become like a really nice, smooth, elastic dough. So now I'm gonna continue the last 2 minutes and add in the butter. So I'm gonna just put it in a tablespoon at a time and let it work in really well between each piece before adding the next one. All right, so that needed another about 3 minutes, so it's really 8 minutes total, but you can see it came into a really nice dough, and it is a little sticky. Now, usually I eyeball this in the mixer, but if you're really wanting to make sure that it's doubled, any kind of clear container is great. These are the professional ones you use in a restaurant. You can get these on Amazon. And then, you know, if you put the dough in here at whatever height, like it's at the 2-quart line and it's at 4 quarts, then it's doubled. That's how you know that the rise is complete. It's always a double on both the first and the second proof. But I'm gonna go ahead and scrape this in there. Normally I would use my pastry scraper. It's a flexible, flat thing that makes it really easy to get dough out, but for some reason I can't find it. So I have this little spatula that's kind of stiff. And I'll use this to scrape the dough into this container. All right, so I got it in the container, and it's actually about at the 1-quart line. So when it comes up to almost a 2-quart line, it will be doubled and it'll be ready to roll out. I forgot to mention I did spray the container pretty heavily just with some canola oil, and I'm just gonna hit the top just for some little extra insurance to make sure nothing sticks. This is a very sticky dough because of the sugar. And then I am going to just cover it with a towel, just to make sure that it doesn't dry out or anything while it's rising. Now it doesn't matter if you want to do this on the counter, you do it on the counter, which is what I do it. If you want to do it in the fridge overnight, you can do that as well and do the second, the rollout the next day. The important thing is that it gets, that it's doubled in size. That's how you know it's ready. Generally, I do the first rise at room temperature on the counter, and then I do the second, I roll them out, and then I let them rise overnight in the fridge for the second rise. You really want, if you want a really good yeasty flavor, you really want a good 8-hour rise overnight in the fridge for one of those. My preference again is to do the first rise at room temperature, because then they're ready to go the next day. I can just pull them out, and let them warm up a bit and throw them in the oven. But I normally do this one on the counter first, and a slower rise is better. So if your kitchen's cold, it might take you an hour, 2 hours, 3 hours. If your kitchen is warm, I'm in Florida, so it's like 45 minutes here. But a slow rise is better. It gives you more flavor. So I just, whatever the case, it just needs to be doubled. And that's how you know that it's risen properly. So it was a lot colder in my house than I was expecting it to be, and it was taking a while to rise. But what I did was, just to speed it up, is I turned my oven on for about 20-30 seconds and then turned it off, and then I just sat this in the oven. And it took about an hour and a half. You can see it is now just over the 2-quart line, so it is just over doubled, which is perfect. So I have had a lot of cinnamon rolls, and I decided to actually make these into cherry rolls. So when I roll them out, I'll mention how I would do it if they were cinnamon. But to make this, you could just use like a cup of your favorite preserves or jam or jelly, whatever, and warm it up in the microwave to thin it out a bit. To make this, I actually just used some frozen cherries that I let thaw, 200 grams worth. You could use any fruit. I added a teaspoon of cornstarch and about 36 grams of sugar. And I also just, because it was cherries, I added a couple ounces of almond paste as well. Microwaved it up really well and pureed it. Another filling that's really good is blueberries. You can do pureed blueberries and also add some additional fresh or frozen blueberries to it as well. I didn't add any whole cherries because the cherries that were in this frozen bag were kind of large. But anyway, I did cornstarch in this because that was what I had on hand, but tapioca starch actually is a lot better and will give you a much clearer, like cherry pie looking filling. And of course, you could use the canned cherry pie filling if you want. I don't like canned cherry pie filling because it tastes like metal to me. It tastes like the can. Even the best, like organic ones, taste like metallic. All right, so what I've done is I went ahead and rolled, well, I say I rolled them out, but honestly, I don't roll them out. I just use my hands and gently pat them out. It's much easier. You can get a much better rectangle. And it's a really soft dough. It's not necessary to use a rolling pin. It's pretty easy to do it and get it nice and even. I roll it out to be just over about twice the size of the 9 by 13 dish if there were two next to each other, and that's about the perfect size. And then I also, before I rolled it out, while my hands were still clean, I took a nice long piece of the dental floss. This is a little bit longer than I needed. You probably only need about, a foot and a half or something, but so I went ahead and did that. And then let me show you how I fill them. So it's always easier to roll away from yourself. So will fill them starting all the way at the opposite side and come all the way over, and then leave about an inch, about that much, without any filling or topping on it, because that will allow the side to seal when you roll it, forward. You don't need butter on these. The butter should be in the dough, not on the dough. If you put butter on a cinnamon roll, what's going to happen is all your filling, your cinnamon, your sugar, or in my case, the cherry, is going to like drip down into the bottom of the cinnamon roll and kind of burn on the bottom instead of actually being really nice and securely up inside the roll. You really want the butter in the dough, not rolled up inside the roll. So I'm gonna spread this out and show you what it looks like and show you how to roll it up. Okay, so quick pause here. I said that I would tell you about how I'd make these if I was making cinnamon rolls instead of cherry rolls. So you see where the top of this is covered all the way to the edge on the three sides, but then I left about an inch gap at the bottom. I would do it exactly the same for cinnamon rolls or any other kind of rolls. Again, I would absolutely not put butter on this. I would only put butter in the dough as I did. And I would have actually, where the same areas you see this filling, I would actually just sprinkle cinnamon directly on it, not too heavy because remember it's going to be rolled up and you can actually put so much cinnamon that you give someone indigestion. You're not trying to do the cinnamon challenge here. And then to cover this entire area, I would use about 1 US cup, or 200 grams of brown sugar. You can use light or dark brown sugar, it doesn't really matter. I think light actually works better for this. And then just spread it out exactly as the filling is here, and then continue with the rest of the recipe. All right, so notice how thin this is. You want to make sure you go right to all three edges and then leave the strip at the bottom. But notice how thin the sauce is. I'll be honest, if I got a pizza that only had this much sauce, I'd be mad. I like a lot of sauce on my pizza. I like a lot of filling on my cinnamon roll. But remember, these are going to be rolled up, and each, this is going to be a strip, this will be a strip, these will be rolls. So there's actually going to be a lot of sauce inside it. You don't want to put more than a very thin layer because if you do, it's all going to squish out and not work. So remember, I did say that it is easier to roll away from yourself, which it is. But I am wearing my pajama bottoms and I'm trying to stay off camera, so I'm actually doing this from the opposite side of the dough. I would normally be doing it from the other side and rolling away from myself. I just kind of use my fingers to kind of start curling it And then you just start rolling, and you want to make sure that when you get your very first row that you kind of try to roll it a bit tight. These are going to rise, and so they're going to, you know, snug up anyway, but try and make them a little tight, but don't, you know, roll the filling out. And you just kind of work your way back and forth, kind of turning it over on itself a little at a time, and see it just comes right off the counter. Super easy because the counter is oiled, no flour needed. One thing I did want to just pause and point out here is that, remember I said that you can do either your first rise in the refrigerator or your second rise. Generally, when I'm making these for guests or for myself, I would do the first rise on the counter and then roll them up like this and then put them in the fridge and let them rise overnight in the fridge. But the reason for doing that is so that in the morning I don't have to deal with rolling out cinnamon rolls before breakfast and before coffee. But if you really want the cinnamon rolls to look nicer and have a much tighter, better roll, it's actually easier if you do the first rise overnight in the refrigerator, because then the dough is colder, and when you roll it out, it's a lot easier to work with. And then you can do your second rise on the counter. So either way, whatever works for you. In this case, I'm just trying to get through this really quickly to make the video. So I'm just doing both at room temperature. And again, this is, of course, a very, very soft dough, super easy to work with, but I'm probably not working fast enough because I'm trying to pay attention to the camera, and it's starting to do its second rise right here on the counter already. Now, I don't know if you can see the end here, but in the bakery, if you were selling this professionally, you might want to trim off the ends. I generally don't, because I don't find it makes that much difference. You just put the ends of it facing down in the pan. So I try to mark out, you know, about where the middle is. I just eyeball it, and then I take the floss, wrap it around my fingers like this so that it's tight, and you can slide it right under, go right to the middle, and then just come across like that, boom, and it's cut in half. And then you cut each of these in half again. There you got 4, and then if you divide each of these remaining pieces into thirds, you have a dozen, which is a row of 4 and a row of 3 to fill up the pan. These aren't all perfectly sized. I would have been more careful with my rolling if I was doing this professionally, but this is just for me as an example for you guys. And then the easiest way to clean, you know, this counter, of course, if you grew up in the South like I did, you're used to having very oily food, is to use hot soapy dishwater. It comes, you know, it comes right up. You would never want to try and clean this with a cleaner and a paper towel. You'd just be smearing it around all night. So I've got to take my pan and I'm going to just pop these in it. All right, so here they are in the pan. I was in such a hurry to get these in here because it was warming up. They were already starting to rise really quickly. I didn't bother to put them all in the same direction. Some people are crazy about that. I'm not. I kind of like them going every direction, but if you care about the swirls going the same direction, you can place them that way. So what's going to happen is these are going to rise up, and they're pretty much going to fill in the entire pan. They're going to be touching each other, which is what you want. You do need a high-sided dish like this. Cinnamon rolls are not something you want to get brown on the outside. There are other pastries where that's desirable, but cinnamon rolls is not one of them. You want them to be soft and chewy, not browned all the way around. Maybe just a little bit of browning on top. And I can kind of play with these to fix the shape here where I was just trying to move really quick. It's a problem with trying to film with one hand and roll cinnamon rolls. It doesn't work so great together. So I let them rise about an hour, and you can see they're pretty much completely filled in the pan. So I'm going to cook them at 350 degrees for 20 to 30 minutes. Usually it takes about 25 minutes in my oven, but at the 20 minute mark, I'm going to put the thermometer probe in. If I do it now, you know, it'll leave a big indentation because they're really soft. So about 20 minutes is when I'll stick it in. So tonight these actually took about 30 minutes to bake, and here's what they look like in the end. I only use 1 cup of icing. Depending on the type of cinnamon rolls, sometimes I use cream cheese frosting. This one I actually just used like maybe 2 tablespoons of softened butter, 2 tablespoons of buttermilk. You could use regular milk, and then about a cup of powdered sugar and a splash of almond extract to go with the cherry filling. If I'm using cream cheese frosting, I wait until they're almost completely cool to frost them, but when I do the frosting without cream cheese, I tend to put the frosting on when they're pretty hot out of the oven because I like it to kind of get a little bit sort of like a donut crust on the outside of the gooey frosting. But anyways, so that's how I make them.